So as we crack on into our second talk of the day, for those that you can now see Riccardo, who's an experienced ELT materials writer, test item specialist editor, and teacher trainer. He specializes in developing high quality ELT materials with a particular focus on test item writing, formative assessment, global skills development, pronunciation. He's worked on lots of English exam. He's worked for publishers such as OUP, and he has received an ELTon Award for Innovation in Teacher Resources, which I'm very jealous about because I've never won one of those. And now he's here to talk about positive washback in exam preparation. So, Riccardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yes, encouraging positive washback in exam preparation. What we're going to talk about in the session, we're going to talk about assessment and the links between tests and the classroom. We're going to talk about how tests influence our teaching, of course, but also about how we can make the most of test preparation to help our students also develop skills that will help them beyond the classroom and beyond the context of exams. So these are the key points we'll cover in the session. First, we'll take a look at the different types of tests that we use in ELT and the reasons why we use them. Then we'll talk about the concept of washback. That is basically how tests influence what we teach and how we teach, and therefore what and how our students learn in class. Once we've done that, once we've looked into the theory of assessment and washback, we'll bring it back to the classroom and we'll look at practical strategies to promote positive washback in our own exam preparation lessons. We'll have a look at strategies for each of the 4 skills, of course, separately, but we'll also mention how to combine them through integrated skills tasks. And to wrap things up, we'll briefly touch on the relationship between technology and assessment, along, of course, with some of the ethical issues that we need to take into account when using technology, when we use technology in general, but also, more importantly, when we use it to assess our students. In general in ELT, I mean, and then, of course, more importantly, when we use it to assess our students. There will be time for questions at the end, but before that, I will share 2 QR codes with you. One for you to download a list of extra readings on washback in case you were keen to dig deeper into the topic, and another for you to download to have a written summary of the session. So that if the QR codes don't work, don't worry, our host from OUP will drop the files in the chat, so you'll be able to grab them from there. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Why do we assess? What do we assess? And what types of tests do we use to assess? We could say that traditionally we look at tests from a chronological perspective. Depending on what we want to test, we'll use different types of tests. We'll use achievement tests, for example, to look into the past of our students' learning. They help us look back at what students have learned. So examples of achievement tests could include the end of unit test, which our students take after finishing a unit, or the end of term or the mid-course test, which we give at the end of a school term or halfway through a course. And also the end of course test, which we use to wrap up the school year or to wrap up a course. Then we got proficiency tests, which tell us where our students are in the present moment, that is what level they are today. Examples of proficiency tests include, of course, the Oxford Test of English for Schools, TOEFL, APTEs, and many others. So if achievement tests help us look into the past of a student's learning, and proficiency tests give us a snapshot of our students' current level, diagnostic tests help us look into the future. They help us look ahead to what our students need, what they need to work on to achieve certain objectives. They help us look into the future of our students' learning, but also, and probably more importantly, on the future of our teaching. We use diagnostic tests at the start of a course, for example, when we want to check our students' grammar or vocabulary or sub-skills and so on, so that we can tailor our teaching, our classes to our students' needs and make their learning journey as smooth and as fruitful as possible. Basically, we use the results of our diagnostic tests to improve our teaching and to improve our students' learning. So now, another way to think about tests and why we use them is by breaking them into the two big categories of summative and formative assessment. Summative tests are those tests that we use to assess what our students have learned over a certain period of time. So which could be after a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months, after a whole term or a whole school year. Summative tests help us see if our students have reached their learning goals, if they've met the required standards, and if they've really learned what they were supposed to learn, or if we've taught what we were supposed to teach. Then formative assessment, it's more about helping the teacher it's about helping us improve our teaching. It tells us whether we're doing our job well, and if we're getting through to our students, whether they're understanding and learning what we're teaching, basically. So that's also why summative assessment is often called assessment of learning, and because it measures what students have learned. And this is also why formative assessment is often labeled as, is often called assessment for learning, because it helps both teachers and students understand what students need to work on and how to get there. Okay, so now that we've gone over the different types of assessment and tests and their objectives, let's take a moment to think about what makes a test a good test. What do I mean by that? So a key question to ask ourselves in this case would be, does the test I'm preparing my students for actually help me teach better, and does it help my students learn better? In other words, does the test I'm preparing my students for actually improve the way I teach? Does it help me refine my methods and make my lessons more effective? Does it actually help my students learn and use language? So actually, more important, another question that is very important to ask could be, does the test help my students develop other important skills, such as critical thinking, creativity, collaboration? And what about motivation? Does the test actually make my students want to put in more effort? Does it push them to go the extra mile and study harder? And finally, does the test have real world value? Can students use the tests and its results, of course, for something practically meaningful? So like getting into university or advancing in their careers, getting a promotion. At the end of the day, tests aren't just about measuring knowledge, but they should also add value to both teaching and learning. So yes, these are important questions that we should ask ourselves. They're important for us to understand what the test has to offer, what we can get from it, and how we can use it to prepare our students not only to pass the test, but also for them to be able to use language outside of the classroom, again, beyond the context of exams. To answer such important questions, or to answer them better, I'd say, actually, we first need to understand the concept of washback. So let me propose a bit of reflection here. This is a question for you guys. So what do you know about washback? I'd like you to take a moment to answer this question. You don't have to answer it in full. You can just come up with a simple definition if you want, but you can also just mention an aspect of washback. Even if you're not 100% sure, anything works. If you want to, you can type your thoughts in the chat box, and I'll read and comment on them as we go. So let's have a minute to answer this question. What do you think? What is washback? What do you know about it? No idea, nothing. Influence of tests on the classroom, yes, and teaching. Not familiar with the term, that's good. Feedback or consequences, definitely. Linda? We talk about feedback and we talk about consequence, of course. Washback is a sort of synonym, near synonym of course, of washback, consequences. Caroline says it's a type of feedback in order to help with moving forward as well. Sure. There could be formative assessment, but also going to take that into account. The effect of test on the classroom. Helping learning. Influence of testing on learning and teaching. Okay, all right. So I think we've got quite enough contributions. Yeah, basically, this is a straightforward definition of washback, and most of you have already come up with it. It's basically the same definition that we used earlier on. Washback is the influence of tests on teaching and learning. The idea is pretty simple. When there's a test coming up, things in our classroom start to change, and they do change. Research on washback shows that tests affect the materials we use in class, of course, the teacher and their teaching, and the students and their learning. But test affects materials, teachers and students to different degrees. So the impact on materials is quite obvious. When we prepare students for an exam, there are plenty of course books designed for that given test. So, and when a test is updated, when you have a test reform, publishers bring out new books to match. As for students, the effect on them is quite significant too, especially when the test is high stakes, like when passing means getting into university or getting a promotion or getting a job or a better job. It can really affect their motivation, can it? And finally, the teacher. The impact of tests on teachers is a bit more debated. Some researchers say that tests do influence how teachers teach, so how we teach, while others actually say that they don't really make much difference. In my own experience, preparing students for tests has affected how I taught. But again, it all depends, we're going to see it, it all depends on how the teacher sees the test. That is whether we think that the test is useful or not, which basically means whether we like the test or not. So you might have heard the labels positive washback and negative washback. Why do we call washback positive or negative? We call washback positive, or better, we say that a test has positive washback when we see that the test encourages good teaching and encourages meaningful learning. And we say that a test has negative washback when it only encourages us to teach the test, which means when we mainly focus our classes on teaching exam strategies and exam tasks instead of actually helping our students develop and use more important skills, or learn and use the language we're teaching them. Okay, so here's another question for you that I'd like you to reflect on. Again, you don't have to really give a complete answer. Do you think, theoretically speaking, do you think, or depending on your experience, do you think that a good test always leads to positive washback? Do you think that preparing students for a good test always brings positive change to your teaching and to your students' learning? Take a minute to think about it. Think about your own experience. And again, if you want, you can share your thoughts in the chat box. It depends. Some people say they teach for a national exam, so they must be. Tests are a challenge for both teachers and students. Obvious. It could be obvious. What a good test. That's a very good question, Greta. Yeah. Yes, of course, our ELT and TOEFL are examples, as is the Oxford Test of English, APTEs, Cambridge exams, all of them. Not necessarily, not always. Mixed answers, not really, not definitely, not necessarily. Yeah, that's actually the answer. But basically, actually, there is no simple yes or no answer to this question. Research actually shows that the relationship, well, it shows that the relationship between tests and teaching and learning is more complicated than that. Even a good test, which is, a test that matches our students' needs, doesn't always have a positive impact on our teaching or on our students' learning. And even a bad test could lead, or doesn't necessarily have, a negative effect on the classroom. Just to be clear, when I say, there was a good question actually, what's a good test, what's a bad test? When I say good tests or bad tests, I don't mean whether the test is well designed or well written. What I mean is how well the test matches my students' needs. For example, if my students need academic skills for university, then a test that assesses those skills, I'll call it a good test. A test that is good for them. But if I have the same group of students and the test they're preparing for tests a wide variety of language skills, except for academic skills, then I'll call it a bad test, even if it's well designed in other ways. So again, there is no simple answer to the good test positive washback correlation question. You might ask yourselves why. This is because, as with most important things in life, or in ELT in this particular case, there are many different factors at play. Washback doesn't only depend on the test or its quality. Washback also depends on our students, their age, level, but also their learning preferences and interests. Washback also depends on us, the teachers. It depends on our beliefs, on our understanding of assessment in general, if we like the test or not, if we believe in the text constructs, and so on. Washback also depends on the immediate context, the context we're teaching. So the size of our classroom, the resources available in our classroom, and so on. And of course, washback also depends on the social and cultural context we're teaching in, the pedagogical traditions within this context, the role that the language we are teaching plays in that particular context, and so on. So there are definitely, there are many factors at play that affect washback, and it's very hard to control them, except for one, us, the teacher. If there is no simple link between test quality and washback quality, then it's the teacher who has the power to make sure that washback is and stays positive, or as positive as possible. Now, I'm not saying that everything depends on the teacher, although I'm actually saying that. But when it comes to shaping what happens in the classroom, the teacher is we are the ones that can make the biggest difference. What do I mean? So how do we do that? How do we as teachers promote positive washback in our exam preparation classroom? Through experience, training, and of course, smart strategies. Let's go through some key ones. Let's start with some more, some direct tips. Tip number one, build your assessment literacy. This might seem quite obvious, but it's often quite overlooked. We need to understand the test. We need to understand the test format and what it actually assesses. We need to understand the kind of tasks that the test includes. We need to understand the skills and sub-skills that it assesses, and of course the kind of language that the students need to pass it. Once we know this, we can help as students prepare in the right way by preparing better classes. To do this, we should use all the resources that we have available. There could be handbooks, official handbooks, sample tests, past papers, anything that the exam boards or education ministries make available either in print or online, and use them to help us understand the test better. To build assessment literacy, we also, of course, need to invest in professional development. We can do this through in-house training, of course, at our schools, or by attending workshops that from publishers, for example, and exam boards, but also through peer learning. What do I mean by peer learning? There's lots we can learn from our colleagues by observing our colleagues and being observed by them, and of course sharing ideas with them. Tip number 2, use formative assessment. Now, formative assessment helps both the teacher and the student track progress and improve. What do I mean? Formative assessment helps us and our students track progress to improve us, to improve our teaching, sorry, and to improve their learning. It's not just about marks, it's about learning. For example, we can start a course or a lesson with a diagnostic test to see what our students already know about a particular language point, a particular topic, and we can use self-assessment and peer assessment tools like checklists and reflection questions. These are examples of formative assessment or formative assessment tools. Also, we have tools like portfolios and learning journals are also very helpful as formative assessment tools, especially for self-assessment, for students to see their progress over time, not just in one test. And also, formative assessment can create a positive, what I call a positive feedback loop, a loop that keeps students motivated and more confident. Positive feedback loop basically means that what is learned is tested, and what is tested and evaluated goes back into teaching and learning. In other words, all results from formative assessment activities are fed back into teaching so that we can improve our teaching and so that we can improve the students' learning. Tip number 3, balance test preparation with real-world skills, broader skills. Yeah. We need to prepare our students for the exam. Of course, we need to have them practice exam tasks. We need them to teach them useful exam strategies, of course, and we have to help them understand how to answer the questions in the test. But that shouldn't be the only focus. Alongside exam practice, we should also develop critical thinking skills, creativity and problem solving. That is broader skills. For example, instead of just having students read a text, do the corresponding exam task and close the books and notebooks, we could have them read the text again and, for example, analyze its purpose, its tone, or even check whether there are any biases, for example, and so on. We can have students read the text again, this time between the lines, and we can have them reflect on the reasons, on the reason why the writer might have written the text, whether there are any hidden meanings, or whether it's biased, and so on. We could have students do this individually first, and then compare ideas in pairs or small groups, and finally, perhaps bring everything back to the class and through a whole class discussion. When students have done a listening task for an exam, for example, we could ask them to, because we made an example with reading, what about listening? We could ask them to listen to the recording again and think about how the speaker expresses, I don't know, uncertainty, for example, or politeness, urgency, or their emotions, and so on. Or we could get students to react to the text and say whether they agree or disagree with information in the text, and to explain why. So by balancing test preparation with these types of activities, we're not just teaching to the test, but we're preparing students for more useful thinking processes and for real life communication. Okay, so tip number 4, make the most of the exam skills that you're already teaching in class. We already teach a bunch of exam strategies that are very useful for real life use. So many of them are also useful beyond the classroom. Scheming and scanning, for example, they aren't just for exams. They help us in real life with reading emails and documents quickly, for example, for us to prioritize and organize work, and so on. And the same could be said for paraphrasing and summarizing, which are also useful to improve our communication skills for work or for studies, for university, but also in everyday life, in all sorts of situations, basically. Also, eliminating incorrect options in multiple choice questions actually also helps us with reasoning for decision making, I would dare say, both at work, at school, and also in our everyday life. So by making these connections, we're not just preparing students to pass the test, but we are hopefully setting them up for success in the real world outside of the classroom. So now let's have a look at how we can promote positive washback when teaching each of the 4 skills separately for now. Starting with speaking, role plays can be a real game changer. Role playing exam tasks in class, of course, help our students build confidence. Role playing helps our students get more confident and get better prepared for the test. But they also prepare students for real life situations. When we simulate real world conversations alongside exam practice, students get double the benefit. They get better at speaking for the test and for their life outside of the classroom. Instead of role plays, of course, we could go straight into the realm of debates and discussions, which is another form of role playing, if you like. So encouraging students to defend their opinions, it helps them develop fluency, of course, but it also helps them develop critical thinking and the ability to think on their feet. So, for example, we could use debates or debate formats like the spontaneous debate challenge. Many of you might already be familiar with it. For those who don't, this is basically how it works. The spontaneous debate challenge. So before class, you can collect some statements on topics that you know that your students will be interested in discussing. You collect the statements and then write them on cards. Then once in class, you divide the students into 2 groups, A and B groups. You tell the students in group A that they will have to agree with the statement, and those in group B that they will have to disagree with it. A student in group A gets to pick the first card at random, so they don't know what statement they're discussing and they don't know what they're really agreeing or disagreed with. And they have 30 seconds or a minute, depending on the level, to present their arguments. So after that, one student from group B gets 30 seconds to prepare how to reply to students' argument, and then another 30 seconds to actually reply to the argument. And so on. It repeats itself with students picking cards and arguing in favor or against the topic and replying to each other's arguments. In this type of debate format, the students aren't allowed to give their own opinion. They get what they get, and they have to make the most of what they have, what they get. Debate challenges like this one, in fact, help students develop critical thinking, but they also get used to, but also help them to get used to think on their feet, again, just like in an exam or just like in real life. Now, onto self and peer feedback. These can also make a huge difference, like using rubrics, for example, checklists and reflection questions. They help students evaluate their own speaking and each other's speaking. We're talking about speaking here, but they can obviously be used for writing and also for grammar and vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. So let's make an example. Let's say that we want our students to practice a given section of the speaking test or the exam. So we could ask them to do the task, but record their answer. So using their voice recording app, for example, on their phones. They could then swap recordings with a partner. They could they will listen to each other's recordings, and they will give each other feedback using the checklists or the reflection questions, or rubrics, of course. The checklists, of course, they will you will have carefully prepared the checklists either to focus in different areas of the speaking in general speaking skills, or on the specific criteria of the test, grammar and vocabulary, pronunciation, discourse, and so on. Or of course, the students could do the same activity and listen to their own recording as self-feedback. So yes, thanks to self-feedback and self and peer assessment activities, students can they get the chance to understand the assessment criteria from the exam better, and they can reflect and identify their strengths and their weaknesses, and they can take more ownership of their progress. But by integrating these strategies, we're not only giving them speaking practice for the exam. What we are doing, in fact, is also give them a chance to develop critical thinking, as well as some opportunities for, why not, social and emotional learning practice. Okay, let's move on to writing. One of the most popular approaches to teaching writing is through the genre approach. That is basically having students look at a model text, analyze it, and then use it to write it, reference back to it to write their own. This is the typical approach that you can find in exam preparation course books, and it's definitely a great approach, and generally both teachers and students find it pretty helpful. But another great approach is process writing, where students first discuss the text, what the text is used for, like its purpose, how the information is organized, the type of language that you can normally find in them. Then they're given a topic to write about, or even the title of the text they will have to write, and then together in pairs or small groups they brainstorm ideas to decide what to include in their text, and so to plan their first draft. Once they've written their first draft, they swap texts with a partner and give each other feedback again. Finally, considering the feedback received from their partners, the students proceed to edit and improve their text before handing it to the teacher. So process writing is an approach that can help students build writing skills step by step, but at the same time, they develop critical thinking, collaboration, and problem-solving strategies. And on top of that, it can help them get more confident and independent writers in general, not only for exams, but write text in real life too. Right, next on, reading and listening, which I've grouped together for obvious reasons. So reading and listening exam tasks can also be turned into opportunities for deeper learning. So, for example, after students have completed a reading and listening task, we could encourage them to do further research on the topics from the text or recording they have just used in class. And they would do this using real-world sources, real-world materials, news articles, podcasts, videos, and so on. So it just goes beyond simple comprehension, and we are actually asking students to analyze the text further. We are asking them to analyze the purpose of the text, its tone, the writer, or even the speaker's intent or the speaker's bias, in case there are any. Something useful that we already do in class is actually we already asked students to rewrite incorrect answers into correct answers, which could help them understand the reasons behind their mistakes. And so, to do a bit of deeper analysis on the language. But we can also let our students design their own tests, their own items, which also helps them, engage more deeply with the material. They could write their own items, of course, but we could even ask them why not to write a whole test. And finally, let's quickly mention integrated skills. To foster real-world skills development, of course, we should move beyond isolated exam tasks and basically combine skills in a more natural way. Project-based learning comes in handy in this when it comes to integrated skills. Through project-based learning, we actually ask our students to research a topic, then produce a text. Could be we could ask them to write a summary, for example, or a report, and then present their findings back to the class through an oral presentation, video blog, and so on. Or we could offer our students more creative tasks. We could ask them to manipulate the texts and, for example, turn them into, we could ask them to turn the text or the information in the text into a short film. And so first they have to write a storyboard and then probably made a video. Or we could ask them to turn the information in the text into an informative poster or, again, a video blog. And then, again, to combine different skills, to combine, for example, speaking, writing, and visuals together in this example. So these approaches might help in making exam preparation a little bit more engaging for students, and of course also a bit more like how we use language outside of the classroom, so in real life too. All right, so let's wrap things up with a few thoughts on assessment and technology. Technology is definitely changing the way we test and assess our students. There's no question about it. We are definitely in the process of we're moving away from old school paper exams, and we're slowly but surely shifting towards a more digital world, so towards digital tools such as online tests and automated scoring. That might sound a bit overwhelming, but these changes, I think, bring some exciting opportunities both to learning and assessment. So take e-portfolios, for example. Think of them as digital folders where students can store all of their work, their essays, their recordings, their vocabulary lists, and much more. The best part of it is that students can check their progress anytime and from anywhere when they want to. Then there is, of course, adaptive tests, like the Oxford Test of English. The Oxford Test of English is an adaptive test. These kinds of tests, what is an adaptive test? It's a test that adjusts the difficulty based on the candidate's answers. So if a candidate gets a question right, so the next one will be a little harder. And if the candidate struggles with one question, then the next one will be a little easier. So adaptive testing helps make the test feel a bit more personalized. And of course, it keeps the student challenged at just the right level. And what about automatic scoring? AI can now mark writing and speaking tasks, yes, in seconds, quite quickly, can give quick feedback on grammar, vocabulary, and structure. It's super useful, but definitely not perfect. So AI still struggles with things like creativity, tone, even still with language sometimes in some cases. So the best approach, at least for now, is to combine A power with teacher power. So AI with our own experience, if you use AI, that is. Anyway, for now, technology isn't really replacing teachers, I hope, not yet. It's actually giving us, us teachers and also students, more tools to make assessment, surely, faster, maybe in some cases even a little bit more fun. Of course, new technology also brings, it brings great possibilities, but also brings, it also raises some important questions. First off, of course, is the digital divide. Not everyone has equal access to digital tools. Some students, but also some teachers, of course, they struggle with the digital divide. They struggle with the lack of technology, with, which can put them at a huge disadvantage with respect to those who do have full or total access to such tools. And then, of course, there's the issue of over-reliance, as well as, of course, overuse of AI. So if students rely too much on AI to do the thinking for them, or if we do the same as teachers, we might miss, our students might miss out on developing essential skills. Again, critical thinking, problem solving, which are basically skills that, that they will need in real life. And of course, let's not forget fairness. AI-driven tests or assessment in general can sometimes push teachers to, we said, teach the test, just like, traditional exams do. In this case, I call it teaching to the AI. So if teachers don't fully understand how AI works, they might actually end up teaching to the AI instead of focusing on real teaching in this case. And of course, learning to the AI is definitely not the goal. That said, things are changing. Technology is evolving. And assessment is evolving with technology. So moving towards, of course, a lifelong learning approach that adapts to the new technologies it comes, of course. But again, when used wisely, both AI and exams can help students learn in a way that actually matters. So not just for passing tests, but for real growth. So that was the last slide of my presentation on encouraging positive washback in the classroom. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope that you find any of these strategies useful, of course, in your classroom. And as promised, I think, let me see if we have them. Yes, as promised, here are the two QR codes that I was telling you about at the beginning. Again, one is for you to get a list of readings, further readings. Again, if you want to learn more about the topic of washback, and the other to download the key takeaways. Well, it's a summary of the session, basically, with the key points from the sessions. I think we're going back to here. So yes, I think we're going to have some questions from you guys.
So Riccardo, look, if you click on Q&A, you'll see the Q&A tab. If you need
absolutely.
If you need any help, just to say to the audience, if you can't do the QR codes, don't panic. At the end of the session, I'm going to put up the handouts again, and we will send you them. Okay, so if you can't get them now, don't panic. Just bear with me until the end of the session. Riccardo, the Q&A is yours. Let me know if you need help.
That's great. Before I do that, actually, so these are some. I prepared a little list to kind of, a list summarizing the what I think are the basically the three key points of the session. Sure, of course, positive washback that benefits, of course, our teaching and learning and long-term language goals. We talked about the teacher playing a very important role in fostering positive washback in the classroom, and we talked about formative assessment as assessment for learning, whose goal is to, of course, foster deep learning and real-world skills rather than simply measure a student's language proficiency. So let's see if it actually get you to think about more questions.
Can you see them okay?
I can see them okay, yeah. I'm going to just go and have a look. How much technology? It's a very good question. Gabby asks, how much technology should we use in class? In terms of minutes, it's out of 50 minutes a class. That really depends on the reason why you're using technology. If you're using technology just because the students want to use technology, then I don't think there's any reason for you to use it. If you're using technology to foster, to help them learn, could be language, it could be any other skill, then it could be even the whole of the lesson, I think. That's a good question from Pipit. Pipit asks, how do you assess students' writing in the age? Sorry. How do you assess students' writing in the age of AI? Should it be changed into paper and pen to understand the writing ability? So it depends. It's probably not. I'm not the best person to answer this question. Maybe Joanna Zoki might be the best. The best person to ask this question. But it depends on, again, it depends on what we use AI for. And it depends on how we actually teach our students to use the AI to assess their own writing. It could be a sort of continuous, it's another feedback loop. We can prompt the AI to tell us whether or not a certain element of our text is good or not. But again, it depends on the on what exactly we are assessing when it comes to writing. Again, AI is still not really good at spotting creativity, tone, sometimes even language. I mean, yeah, it looks nice, it looks readable, but then it doesn't really. There are some things that aren't really coherent. So we have to be careful with that. There's Wakar that asks if I could explain the main types of tests. Again, we talked about achievement tests, proficiency tests, and we talked about diagnostic tests. Achievement tests are those tests that we basically use to evaluate our students' learning during a certain period of time. So, for example, the term, after a unit, after a term, or after the whole school year. Proficiency tests are the tests that we like the Oxford test of English that tells you what level you are today, and diagnostic tests are those tests that tell you what your students know right now about a certain particular topic, a certain language focus, for example, and it helps you look ahead to what they need to get there. For example, you're teaching a particular type of, you're teaching the present perfects. It's a bit of a test each test. So you test how much the students know about their particular language point, and then you, based on the results you get, you tailor you make the lesson more personalized, more tailored to meet their needs, to understand the again, for example, the present perfect. English class. It's very good. It's a good question. I'm not really sure if I can actually answer this question, but this is a great question. Yeah, great suggestions, but really, how about strategies for English classes where you got 50 students and you have 100 minutes of class session? So I really don't know how you do it. You have to get back to certain types of traditional testing here. You got to cover what you need to cover, of course. It depends on the context you're teaching in, of course. If your students, if the students are preparing for a high stakes test, which is very important for them in the society, within the context that they're teaching in, then there is nothing to do. You got to teach them how to pass the test. But again, it's not about just mixing up everything. If you're teaching them, if you're helping them prepare for the test, great, great. But, you can cut out a couple of, even 100 minutes of class, great. Just cut 10 minutes of those 100 minutes to try and get one of the strategies we talked about today, or even, other strategies. Also a very good point. So Carla Fernanda Ferrer says, thank you. Students often ask the question, is this for assessment? If it isn't, basically they lose interest. Okay, and as a result, formative assessment sometimes falls into a void. Great, yes. 200 students, 10 with special needs and 3 different levels. How can we use these techniques effectively without having a mental breakdown? Well, it's a good question. I'm not really sure how you cannot, how you can do that without having a mental breakdown, but I'm sure that you have fallen many times and you stood back again and done your job. It's true, but it depends. We actually it helps if we get through to our students and we actually show them that this is useful for them. It's the test, great. Okay, let's have them look at the test through different lenses. It's not only to pass the test, it's also, oh, look, you've done this. Instead of doing just the reading task, let's do the reading task and also turn this, manipulate the text and turn it into a video blog. What did you learn from the text? And so on. Even if you want to actually, you can also use if it's a multiple choice reading task, then you can use the information from the stems and options to target the new information that they need to work on to make the video blog, for example, or the poster or a presentation. Gilberto asks, how often should we evaluate? It's a very good question. How often do we evaluate? Don't we evaluate every day in class in a sort of way? We do that. Probably we don't do it formally, but we do that. We sort of check how students are responding to certain inputs every day. The most important thing, though, is not how often we do that. The most important thing is how often do we use that to actually make our teaching better, to create classes that are better for them to learn and get their objectives. Going back to the feedback loop metaphor. So it's all the times that we test students. We have to make sure that the data that we collect don't get lost. So we have to use those to prepare our classes better so that those individual students get there in a sort of way. Ethan Manter actually asks, could tests that include integrated skills tasks create more positive washback because they are more realistic? It's a very good question. I would say yes, they do. In this question, actually, it's not really a question, but that it's about tests. It's more about the meaning of teaching and learning, right? So it's more about what do we use language for? Well, we use it to speak, write, to think, to collaborate, and all at the same time. Are they more realistic? Yes, they are. They're definitely more realistic. But again, it depends on the teacher. It always depends on the teacher. The teacher factor is the most important piece. It depends on how much, even if a test that is well designed and includes integrated skills, if you believe that test works, then you're going to you probably will teach it better than other tests you don't like. So yeah, again, I would say yes, but it depends on you as a teacher.
You're almost out of time, Riccardo.
Yes,
It
yes.
depends if you how quick your next answer is, or if you just want to sum up.
No, this is fine. Find something that I've got lots of good questions, so probably answer another one is just like going. Sorry, I would just read questions all the time. No, I think it's better if I sign off, because otherwise I would be here talking with.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions still to go. Yes.
Yeah, no,
that's the way it goes. That's the way it goes. So if you don't worry about it. We do save all the questions, so we can send you them later on if you want to address them.
Sure, please do. Yeah, no, they're very nice questions. I'm thinking the more I read, the more I think probably.
So I'll give you the hand back to you, so you can say goodbye, finish off your session.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending the session. And again, I really hope that you found it useful, or at least that you'll find any of the strategies I've proposed here useful in your own exam preparation classrooms. And I think there is a thank you slide somewhere. There
was. Actually, it's probably useful to leave it on the QR code one. And do it that way.
Absolutely.
We know that you said thank you. We appreciate that. But of course, the audience is now saying thank you to you. Loads of thank yous coming up in the chat box there. So I think a really informative session for everybody. Lots of really interesting ideas to take away. We've just popped up on the screen there a link to our position paper that's coming out. If you click that link, you can join the wait list to find out more about it. Riccardo, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed your ELTOC experience. I look forward to hearing another of your talks in the near future.